Good morning and welcome to this UK Squirrel Accord webinar on wildlife fertility control. I'm Kay Hoare, and before I introduce our presenters, I just want to take this opportunity to highlight the tree damage survey currently underway. So to help us gather data on the issue of grey squirrel bark stripping damage that I know Sarah will be talking about, the UK Squirrel Accord is asking landowners and managers and anyone with owner permission to survey woods across the UK for tree damage and submit your results by the end of the year. We're using the National Forest Grey Squirrel Activity and Impact Assessment, which is a really useful method for monitoring damage and can also feed into management plans. So please get involved and help us collect this vital data. More information is available on our website at squirrelaccord.uk/tree-damage-survey, and I will put that in the chat. And do spread the word around your networks. Great, so on to today. I'm joined by Professor Giovanna Massei at the Botstiber Institute for Wildlife Fertility Control and Dr. Sarah Beatham and Rebecca Pinkham from the Animal and Plant Health Agency. These presentations were given mostly at the anniversary conference earlier this year, and so we're aiming to share this knowledge from that event with those not able to join us, and there'll be a various series of webinars across this winter season. We'll start with the presentations and then have a Q&A session at the end. As always, I'd ask you to please confine your questions to the panel, to the Q&A function, to help me keep track of it, rather than putting them in the chat. And if you want to use the chat, I know sometimes people don't always use the blue drop-down box to click everybody or everyone. So if you want to chat with everyone, then do that. So fantastic. So our first speaker is Giovanna. So if you can share your screen, Giovanna, and we'll start.
Can you see this?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to give you a quick overview of fertility control for rodents. And then I think my colleagues later will zoom in on squirrels. I'm talking with two hats this morning. One is as a researcher at the University of York, but it is also as the Europe Director of the Botstiber Institute for Wildlife Fertility Control. So rodents' impacts are increasing throughout the world. This is a list of the impact. Of course, road traffic accidents refers to the larger one, like coipu or capybara. But then the global cost, just the global cost of the economic impact of rodents is in excess of £21 billion per year. And this was in 2018, so probably is even higher now. And this is besides the ecological impact of the species. The classical way to deal with the species is killing, and it's killing them through rodenticides. And however, the use of rodenticides is increasingly restricted throughout the world for a number of reasons. One is that although a lot of people don't seem to care too much about the fact that dying with a second-generation rodenticide, anticoagulant rodenticide, is a terrible death, because if you're a rat or a mouse, you die after internal bleeding after 2 or 3 days of having ingested the bait. But a lot of people now seem to be much more concerned about the effects, or certainly they are more well known about the effects of rodenticides through the food chain, and particularly through carnivores or birds of prey. That really hit the news. And that is why a number of countries around the world, including in Europe, are either banning or restricting the use of anticoagulant rodenticides. In addition to the fact that resistance is spreading for some of these rodenticides. So if we can't kill them, or we're unable to kill them, there are other ways that we have to start thinking about to at least complement or even substitute in some instances the use of lethal control. And that's where fertility control comes into play. This is an ideal list for a contraceptive for rodents. So ideally, we would like a single or a few doses. They have no side effects on welfare and behavior of animals. Ideally, again, the dose or the contraceptive should have a long-term effect, should be safe for use in pregnancy and lactation, and should be delivered in an oral, as an oral contraceptive, so in a bait. It should also be inexpensive to produce and to administer. It should target only the species we want to target, have no effect on the food chain and on the environment. And then the last one is not a feature of the contraceptive, but we should also be able to deliver this contraceptive to a large proportion of the target population. I can tell you now that none of the currently developed or research contraceptives can tick all the boxes, but many tick most of the boxes, which is, I would say, the important part. These are complicated slides just to say that if you want to stop reproduction in an animal, you can stop at different levels. You can stop it at the level of the brain, where a hormone called kisspeptin is produced. So you can make vaccines for the kisspeptin. You can stop at the level of the gonadotropin-releasing hormones or GnRH hormone. There is the master hormones that controls the release of all the sex hormones. You can prevent sex hormones like testosterone or progesterone so that you will not have sperm production, or you will impair fertility or the egg from developing. You can stop fertilization and implantation. An example of stop fertilization is porcine zona pellucida vaccines. So porcine zona pellucida is a barrier, no, is a barrier, is a series of proteins around the egg, the mammalian egg, and the vaccine against porcine zona pellucida prevents fertilization by the sperm of the egg. So there are several targets that we can use to develop contraceptives. We do have commercially available contraceptives. If you Google them, you will find many, and I always want to spend some words about them. The first one that was registered in the USA for rats is called Contrapest. Is a mixture of triptolide that derives from a plant, Tandricot vine, and VCD, which derives from the rubber industry. It has been registered for rats and mice. You need to keep dosing animals for several weeks to have some, I would say, modest effect or not long-term effect on the reproduction of these animals. Once Contrapest was out, a lot of people, a lot of cities, for instance, in the States, jumped on it and were very excited about it and started using it. So you have a lot of news about rat spread control considered in Boston or in New York and so on. However, initial expectations were not met by reality. And for instance, Boston did not, after some trials, did not introduce rat birth control anytime soon. And this is because the manufacturer suggested that there was 50 to 60% decline in number of rats. However, an independent assessor found that the number of complaints about rats in the same period, in the same time, rose from 82 to 154. So there isn't a lot of scientific evidence that Contrapest works as an effective and safe contraceptive. Very similar story for Evolve. Again, you can buy it from Amazon. And this is another plant extract from cottonseed oil. This has not been registered because it's commercialized as a nutraceutical, so something that is used, it's like vitamins in the UK market. You can sell them without having to register them. According to the manufacturer, achieves population control within 4 to 6 weeks. And although there isn't a lot of evidence about this sentence is also worrying because contraceptive rats should still be alive after 4 to 6 weeks. So again, very scant evidence or effectiveness and safety of this chemical. Again, very similar story for good bites extracted from another plant. There are several papers that talk about the fact that this is working, but we haven't found a lot of evidence that it will work effectively and safely on rats in cities. So we don't know. This, again, this is not registered. This is another nutraceutical. Is not registered, but all of these are commercially available. And if you go on the web and you look at why people buy these, it's very interesting because a lot of people buy these alternatives to poison because they don't like the idea of killing animals. So not necessarily because they've seen that they work, but they feel less guilty about poisoning animals. One contraceptive that does work has been tested in many rodent species is EP1. This is a mixture of two synthetic hormones, levonorgestrel and quinestrol, and is very similar to the human pill. Has been registered in Tanzania, is effective in many rodent species when delivered for 7 to 10 days. The palatability is low, and we don't know about the effect on the food chain. So we don't know whether some of these chemicals are retained in the body, so they could affect the food chain. So more work needs to be done on this, but this is certainly something that has potential. So if we look at the main challenges for developing oral contraceptives for rodents, public expectations is one of the challenges because a lot of people will think that we put an animal on the pill, problem solved. And as researchers, we know this not to be the case because we have to, for a new contraceptive, let's call it Agent X, we have to come up with the right amount, the frequency, and the duration of effect. We need to make sure that it is safe for the target species. We need to make sure that when we feed it directly in the bait, it has the same effect as if we were feeding it directly in the mouth of an animal. So the bait does not affect the contraceptive effects of the drug. The palatability can be an issue, can be also solved. The pharmaceutical industry is full of examples where some chemicals have low palatability and this can be sorted. The food chain effect need to be tested, particularly for the registration of this chemical. We also want it to be stable in field condition. If you put a bait out in summer or in winter, you don't want the contraceptive effects to be degraded or to be affected in any way by the environmental conditions. You also want to check environmental effect. You certainly don't want to affect aquatic organism, soil organism, or you should still know about whether you are affecting them. The cost is obviously of concern, so you need something that is inexpensive in terms of not only active drug, but also the extra ingredients and the bait. And then the cost of regulatory approval can be high. I would like to substitute the cost with the investment because we are really talking about investment rather than costs. And for this, I would like to applaud the work of the UK Squirrel Accord that has clearly, and all its partners, that have clearly invested in research in this area. And finally, the feasibility. The feasibility is not a characteristics of, it's not a challenge of developing an oral contraceptive, but it's certainly a challenge where you go in the field and you need to feed thousands, hundreds of thousands of animals. And I know that my colleagues later will touch on these points. There are other contraceptives on the pipeline. Diazepam is one, is a cholesterol inhibitor, reduces the hormone, the production of hormones in males and females, of sex hormones. And it has low palatability, but there are a couple of studies where if fed for 8 days or 10 days to squirrels, we had a significant reduction in cholesterol that might lead to infertility. So I would say this is one worth watching. And finally, there are oral contraceptive vaccines. So the work of the Accord started because we found, when I was still working at APHA and I was leading the research in this area, we found that 6 oral doses of a gonadotropin-releasing hormone vaccine produce a strong immune response and the prevented reproduction in 6 out of 10 animals. We were not able to reproduce these results. We still don't know why. But the research has continued and is led by Bex Pinkham that will talk after me. And there's still a number of other research groups around the world that are working on the same idea, single oral dose or multiple oral dose of GnRH vaccine. And Bex will tell us more about progress in this area. And we can also benefit from research on oral contraceptive vaccines. Oral contraceptive vaccines have jumped since the COVID pandemic because, and jumped to the attention of everybody, but also children. They're developed for children because children want chewable vaccines rather than injections, or senior patients. And of course, with wildlife, we can benefit from this. So these are the number of studies on oral contraceptive vaccines on rats, but also on people. And again, we can benefit from the technologies used for oral contraceptive vaccines in people or animals. This is an example of another study, another series of studies where the vaccine, anti-zona pellucida vaccine, the one that prevents fertilization, is expressed in genetically modified plants, and when fed orally to animals, to mice, the mice produce antibodies to zona pellucida. So again, is a promising research route. And finally, you would have heard about gene drive. This is an example from a group of researchers in Switzerland. They found a natural gene drive in mice in Switzerland. So natural gene drive here on the top of the slide is in the orange bit of the tail, is something that is passed on to the next generation, but in much higher proportion than normal 50-50. So if a male with his gene mates with a female without the gene, 90% of the offspring will have this gene. And if the males have this gene, their sperm is impaired, their fertility is impaired. If you add to this gene another gene that is synthesized, that is called SRY, not only you will have the same gene transmitted to 90% of the population, but also 90 of the offspring, but also 90% or 99% of the offsprings will develop as males. So you'll have the majority of the offsprings that are male with sterile or with the reproduction impaired. And I believe Professor Whitelaw at the University of Edinburgh is using gene drive and is testing gene drive or is doing research on gene drive on squirrels. This is a map taken from the Botstiber Institute of each dot is a research throughout the world on fertility control for wildlife. This is not a complete map, but it's just to show you that the research is very active. And I would say research on rodents dominates this field. So in conclusions, I believe new contraceptives are emerging because of at least three reasons: the availability of novel technologies, the research on vaccines or drugs for human use, and cross-disciplinary collaborations. I would say that investing in R&D is a priority, and I'm using here investing rather than the cost of R&D, because I believe it is an investment for the future, particularly if we don't have other means of managing overabundant wildlife. But also we need to think about that we can explore different lines of research. Some could be interim solutions. They don't have to be the perfect solution, but they would be key to make progress in this direction. And I would like to finish by inviting everybody to Barcelona in 2026. The Botstiber will hold the 10th International Conference on Fertility Control, and the theme of this year is From Science to Management. How do we move from the labs to the field? And this will be 2 days where we'll share insights and discuss advancement on fertility control with experts, with researchers, and with practitioners. So I hope to see many of you there, and I'm available for any question you might have. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks very much, Giovanna. Interest in wildlife fertility control around the world certainly increasing, and I'm sure that will be a fantastic event for everybody attending. Great. And now, if you just stop, thank you very much. And now we'll pass over to Bex, as Giovanna was saying, to tell us more about grey squirrels.
Yeah, great. I'll just get the presentation up here. Is that up for everybody?
Yes, it's not full screen. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it looks good now.
Cool. So I'm Bex. I'm the project lead for the fertility control project at APHA, looking at developing fertility control for the grey squirrel. What I'm going to do today is take you through some of the decisions and challenges that we need to tackle to make fertility control a practical tool for the management of grey squirrels. So, as Giovanna mentioned, fertility control could have a wider uptake than lethal control measures, but they could also be available when lethal control is unfeasible, or we can use fertility control to complement existing control efforts. So, for squirrels, the issue is that it's not yet available as an applicable tool. But thinking about some of those ideals that we were taken through before, what do we need to think about to make it a reality for squirrels? So we need to think about which fertility control we're going to use, how we're going to stop these animals from breeding in a way that will have significant impact on the population size, how are we going to apply this fertility control, how do we manage those risks to the environment and other wildlife to ensure that we're only targeting grey squirrels, and how do we go about selecting the right contraceptives to ensure that we achieve long-term infertility in a meaningful number of animals. So what we want really is long-term effect from short-term delivery. In some cases, a temporary effect could be a good thing, but for squirrels, we need a contraceptive that's going to last a long time from application. This effect needs to last at least one full breeding season, but ideally it's going to be multiple years without the need to reapply. So this rules out a lot of the most well-known contraceptive options and some of the hormonal options, which require continuous delivery every day. From a practical effort, daily delivery in the long term really isn't feasible for squirrels and can't ever be guaranteed for each individual. This is also going to rule out some of the chemical contraceptives that we've considered in the past, as the return to fertility can be pretty quick as soon as you stop dosing. So what's our solution? With these factors in mind, we're looking at developing the vaccine technology where it's possible to harness the body's immune system, vaccinate against hormones that are essential for reproduction, which prevents their action and stops breeding from happening in the long term. We also really need to look towards remote application. So one of the main drawbacks of lethal control at the moment with trapping is the need to capture the animals. So for an ideal contraceptive, we need something that can be delivered passively. This rules out some of the contraceptives available in injectable form or implants and that sort of thing. Darting could be possible for some species, but it comes with a lot more logistical restraints. It's really labor intensive and expensive, and it just wouldn't be appropriate for squirrels. So our solution to this is developing vaccine technology for application as the oral treatment, which would allow a bait to be given and remove the need for capturing the animals. This reduces the field hours needed and widens the potential for delivery at larger scale areas. So when using a baited treatment system, one of the biggest concerns for the rollout of something like this is the impact on the environment and other non-target species. So we need to get over this hurdle and make sure that we have a bait to deliver in the wild that only goes to the right animals. Sarah and our field team have done some amazing work to produce a squirrel feeding hopper and prove that we can exclude non-targets more than 99.9% of the time. And we know this from more than 180,000 photos and videos recorded from squirrels going in and out of these hoppers. So we've solved the smaller mammals challenge, but what about something more similar? I get asked every time I speak about grey squirrel contraceptives about how we're going to avoid doing any harm to red squirrels, and it's a really important point. In some areas, we're going to need to be even more restricted in the accessibility and tailor it to grey squirrels only. We're now embarking on a new project which is looking to incorporate a weight mechanism to the feeder, so it will exclude the much lighter red squirrels from entry and making it really grey squirrel specific. So we can also design the product itself to help us be a bit more specific with the application of contraceptive vaccine. We often get asked about potential effects on predators, and it's also a very good point. Firstly, we can start to tailor the action and target GnRH, which is a hormone only found in mammals. This means there's absolutely no risk to any birds that might come into any form of contact with a contraceptive. And another bonus with using a vaccine like this is that once it's digested, there's no active components left in the body that could pass along the trophic cascade. Any mammalian predators would also not be at risk from preying on a treated squirrel, which is really important. In addition to this, we need to work on creating a bait that wouldn't be transportable, so there's no risk of squirrels caching this bait for any unsuspecting forager to come across. If we use something like hazelnut paste, the bait has to be eaten in situ and the risk levels dropped even further. So it's not going to be left out in the environment. It's only animals that are going to be able to access these feeding hoppers that are going to have any effect of the contraceptive itself. So we've concluded that the best way forward to tackle the problems is using the oral contraceptive vaccine. We're targeting GnRH as the mammal hormone, increasing specificity and reducing risk, and we want this delivered in a non-portable bait. We've got our specifically designed feeding hopper to reduce the risk of non-target impacts even further, but those are the easy bits. What challenges are we facing now? So GnRH is a self-hormone. The body isn't really designed to react to it as it recognizes it as part of itself. We need to then make it look foreign enough that the immune system will not recognize it, and it's going to stimulate this antibody response. The answer we've used for this is to go for a recombinant protein, where copies of GnRH are attached to a different protein base that makes it look like something foreign. And this is what causes the body to react to something that it would normally ignore. Using this process, we've succeeded in getting a stronger immune response against GnRH in our model species, which is a really great step. So another challenge is that almost no oral vaccines are available anywhere, even for humans. And there's a reason for this. If the immune system was activated easily through the oral route, we'd end up allergic to a lot of food that we eat, which obviously is not going to be a great thing. So we need to try and get around this safety feature of the body. What we can do is increase the potency of the vaccine, making it really obvious that the body should be reacting to it. We load our protein with the copies of GnRH. We load that with additional danger signals, and from this, we've managed to successfully achieve immune responses to GnRH with doses given in the mouth. So we've also got another challenge looking at the oral route. The digestive system is really designed to break down proteins in the mouth and in the acidic stomach, because obviously that's how we get the nutrients from the food that we eat. For the vaccine to work, we need to get it through these acidic environments and trying to target the area in the small intestine called the Peyer's patches. So we need our vaccine to get all the way through the digestive system into the small intestine. So the solution for this, we've been looking at using empty plant pollen spores. These have a really rough surface that enhances mucoadhesion, so it sticks to a lot of the surfaces in the intestine, and it also helps to protect the protein through the acidic digestive system. So using this technique, we've been successful in proving high immune responses and infertility from oral doses of our contraceptive vaccine. So where are we now? With the vaccine we've made significant progress in the last couple of years. We've achieved a really strong immune response through syringe feeding in rats. We've also managed to achieve infertility through a free feeding dose where the vaccine's combined into a sweet liquid bait for rats to eat. This was, as far as we're aware, the first time any groups managed to get a functional response from an immunocontraceptive vaccine that's been delivered in a voluntary bait. Now, the next point we've got might sound a little bit counterproductive, but we've managed to achieve some really great breeding success in our breeding colony. These are a group that haven't been anywhere near a contraceptive. And it's really important for these grey squirrels to breed because the reproductive research relies really heavily on being able to have a baseline for comparison to a treatment. It'd be impossible to tell if any contraceptive that we do give them was working properly if the control animals don't breed either. So we haven't tested on the full breeding colony yet, but we've taken a major step forward into squirrels in the last year and made the important achievement of successfully producing an immune response to our vaccine through oral delivery in squirrels. So this is a really big step forward in the project. It's the first time we've proven an oral response in our target species. And it indicates that the vaccine that we've got is definitely suitable for use in squirrels. We just need to keep on working to optimize the vaccine to increase the consistency and scale of the immune responses that we're getting and develop a suitable bait format to get the vaccine delivered into squirrels in the right way and at the right quantity. We can then move on to proving the infertility effect in our breeding colony. So we've seen some really positive outcomes so far with confirmation that we can stop breeding in the short to medium term in our model species, but we now need to look at fully optimizing this and getting this response consistent. We've been working with some really great collaborators over the last year to redesign some of the key elements of the base vaccine and include more of those really important danger signals for the immune system. We're hoping this is going to give a boost to its action and bring us over the line for the scale and consistency of responses across the board. One of the other hurdles that remains is keeping potency in an attractive bait format. Most of our work has been in liquids so far, which wouldn't be as transferable practically into the field as something like a paste would be. But more solid forms could alter the digestive process. So we need to do a little bit more testing to ensure that the vaccine is still active when combined into a different format. And next, the full move from our model species in rats into our target species, the squirrel. Our initial pilot tests have been promising and shown that our compound is definitely active in squirrels, but because they're a lot larger and have different feeding behaviors, we need to work out what the best dose level and dose concentration is for specific application in squirrels. Now, we're currently working on testing the performance of our new altered formula, along with multiple adjuvants and protection agents, as we want to make sure that we've chosen the most effective combination to make sure the infertility effect is guaranteed. We'll then move into tailoring for action in squirrels, looking at specific species dose levels and attractive bait format. We'll be looking at how to translate the field data that we have on wild squirrel behavior into the vaccine makeup, where feeding patterns over time inform how we need the vaccine to perform. How often they're going to return to feed with hoppers in the wild will heavily guide the number of doses we can effectively deliver and gives us our testing range. We then need to ensure that the chosen vaccine format produces the results that we want over the dosing scale that we can actually achieve in the field. And then we're going to go forward into the really crucial proof of concept trial in our breeding colony that gives us the evidence we need to move towards a registration process and get the vaccine formalized as a usable drug. We hope to do this alongside field tests to prove the efficacy in a natural context. We also want to start looking even further forward now. We're working at a very small testing scale at the moment, so we're going to look into how we can scale up the construction of the vaccine and its components. And we also want to begin to look into potential manufacturers for this large-scale production of the total product and define the next steps that are going to be needed to get the vaccine that we have to a point that it can be taken through the registration processes necessary to become a usable product. So we're starting to open these conversations now to make sure that we're in the best place possible, fully through these proof of concepts, and we can get this out and usable as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Bex, and really positive progress. And it's a pretty exciting time, I think, for the research, isn't it? So
yeah.
Great, thanks. And now I'll hand over to Sarah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Just get my screen shared. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some of the research we've been doing looking at grey squirrel fertility control and also how it could benefit tree health. So it's estimated that grey squirrels will cost England and Wales forestry at least £1.1 billion over the next 40 years in damaged timber, lost carbon revenue and tree replacement. So as you may know, grey squirrels damage trees through the process of bark stripping, and this leaves the trees susceptible to fungal diseases and other diseases and can ultimately lead to tree death. So the UK government has committed to 3 new national forests. So these are the first new national forests for around 30 years. And these will create large areas of new habitat, which will improve our biodiversity and also support our net zero objectives. The Western Forest, will represent around 2,500 hectares of new woodland across central England. But for these new forests to be able to thrive, we need to incorporate grey squirrel management as part of the planning strategy. So this study was looking at one factor that could affect the levels of grey squirrel tree damage, which is grey squirrel density. So the first objective was to look at what is the relationship between grey squirrel density and levels of grey squirrel tree damage. And this was funded by the Forestry Commission and DEFRA. And then secondly, how could fertility control delivered through oral contraceptives significantly reduce tree damage? And this part was funded by the UK Squirrel Accord and also DEFRA. So to look at the relationship, we conducted tree damage surveys and grey squirrel density surveys in winter 2024. So we did these surveys across 26 broadleaf and mixed woodlands, which were located in South Cumbria, North Yorkshire, and the National Forest in the Midlands. So we collaborated with partners such as the Woodland Trust, the National Forest, and the Rodtic Pathman project team as well at Greenwich University. So in total, we surveyed 1,285 trees for squirrel damage. And to do this, we used the National Forest method that Kay's described as part of the UK Squirrel Accord tree damage impact assessment. So our grey squirrel density estimate method was used. So we've developed a method as part of our fertility control research to estimate grey squirrel densities in woodlands. And to do this, we deploy cameras for a week and we can estimate the densities based on the number of grey squirrel photos. So for each wood, we overlaid a grid, a 1 hectare grid, and at each place where the grid lines cross, we basically did a tree damage survey. So to do this, we assessed the 5 closest trees and we assigned them a visual score for damage. So 0 being no damage and 5 being that the tree was basically dying due to the levels of damage we saw. And we did this for both total damage and also new damage that had occurred within the last 12 months. At the same location, we also deployed a camera. So we attached the camera to a tree We put a bait pile in front of it, as you can see on the photograph. We then counted the number of grey squirrel photos we got at each camera. And across the whole of the cameras that were put across the wood, we could then calculate the grey squirrel density based on the number of photos per camera per day. So just to give you an example, so the photo on the left is an example of a new damage given a score of 1. So you can see small areas of bark that have been stripped off the branch by the squirrels. And often you will see older damage underneath that, as the squirrels often return to the same branches, and you will see damage accumulating over time. And if that goes on for too long, you end up with the photo on the right, which shows a tree with damage level 5. So basically you can see that the canopy has completely been destroyed. So progressive damage over time can mean that the trees are susceptible to wind snaps. So any strong breeze going through the woodlands will ultimately snap the top of the canopy. So to summarise our survey results, from the 1,285 trees we surveyed, we found that 45% exhibited squirrel damage. 90% of these trees exhibited new squirrel damage, so it showed that the squirrels were currently active and damaging in the woodlands. 21% of the trees exhibited significant levels of damage, so a score of 3 or above out of 5. And overall, 62% of the woodlands we surveyed had a damage score that suggested that the woodlands were actually, the squirrels were significantly impacting on their health. So this is a table of all the results, but I'm not expecting you to kind of read every result, but if you just see the highlighted yellow squares, those are the kind of high results. So the average squirrel density recorded was 3.4 per hectare, and this ranged from between 1 and 9 per hectare. So this is typical of average squirrel densities across the UK for broadleaf and mixed woodlands. As you can see, for the percentage of trees damaged, we found the highest levels of damage in the younger woodlands surveyed in the National Forest. So the National Forest woodlands are typically between 20 and 30 years old. And this is the key age that squirrels tend to target trees, as the bark is less developed and more susceptible to damage. We also saw that there was higher damage in woodlands that were highly connected to other woodlands. So this could indicate that squirrel movement between woodlands could actually increase squirrel damage. And altogether, we put all this information into a model and assessed density versus damage, but accounting for tree age, connectivity, and tree genus. So this is just a summary of the percentage of trees damaged within each genus. So as you can see, squirrels tend to damage certain species of trees. So the trees that were most targeted by squirrels in our surveys, with over 50% of the trees surveyed damaged, were maple, hazel, hawthorn, beech, oak, and elm. And our 2 most targeted species were hazel and oak. So this may not come as too much of a surprise, as these trees provide a key food resource for squirrels. So you can see the significant damage levels are in yellow, whilst the overall damage are in green. So yeah, we're seeing 45% altogether of trees that are damaged by grey squirrels. So these graphs show the probability of a tree being assigned each of the scores from 0 to 5 for tree damage based on squirrel density along the bottom. So basically, if you look at the 0 score, the probability that a tree would avoid damage and be assigned a 0 score decreased from 57% down to 33% as the squirrel density increased from 2 to 8 squirrels per hectare. And we found that overall there was a significant effect of density on the amount of damage we saw. So if we look at that, if we take a 50-50 chance that a tree would be damaged by grey squirrels, this occurs at around 4 squirrels per hectare. So if we want to tip the balance and reduce the chance of a tree being damaged by squirrels, we basically need to reduce the squirrel population below the average density that we see across the UK. If we look at score 3, so severe damage, the probability that trees would receive severe damage doubled from 16% up to 32% as our densities of squirrels increased as well. We found that our older broadleafs were more likely to exhibit damage, but that's just probably because they've been around for a lot longer. We didn't find an effect of connectivity in the end, but I think that's probably because my interpretation of connectivity might be different to a squirrel. So we might have to kind of explore that in terms of how we define connectivity across woodlands. So overall, our conclusion was to reduce damage in your woodlands, you need to reduce your squirrel population to below 3.8 squirrels per hectare. So how could we achieve that through fertility control? So as Bex mentioned, we've been trialling our purpose-designed squirrel hoppers, squirrel bait hoppers, to measure bait uptake in as many woodlands as possible. So our basic squirrel hopper, which can be used in areas where there's no red squirrels, but there's just greys, is designed, there's a bait compartment protected within a metal box that we put on a wooden stand to reduce non-target access. And the squirrels have to push open a weighted door to access the bait. So we've put these feeders out for a couple of weeks at a time. We pre-bait them for 1 week with the door propped open so the squirrels can learn how to push the door open and access the bait. And we'll bait them with hazelnut paste. And then for 4 to 7 days, we basically shut the door and then we start adding a bait dye, which is designed to simulate a contraceptive delivery. And as you can see, we monitor the feeders with cameras so we can see which animals are feeding from them as well. So at the end of the couple of weeks, then we basically go and trap as many squirrels as possible in the woodland, take a hair sample, and the bait dye, if consumed by a squirrel, will show up in the hair as bright pink fluorescence when looked at under a UV microscope. So from these results, we have produced this graph. So this shows the percentage of grey squirrels in each wood that we detected our bait dye in. So it showed that they entered the hoppers and consumed bait from them. So in just 4 to 12 days, we found that between 56% and 88% of squirrels in each woodland actually fed from the bait. And this depends on the level of squirrel density, as it really depends on the ratio of squirrels to the number of hoppers that are in the woodland, because you get some levels of competition with the squirrels in each population. So we've decided for an effective contraceptive delivery, what you should do is you put cameras out in your woodlands to calculate the squirrel density for about a week. So use our camera method. And then once you have a squirrel density, you can then make sure you can deploy at least 1 hopper per 2 squirrels for 2 weeks. And then you can target the majority of squirrels in your woodland. And this is true for summer, winter, and spring, and different environments as well. And as Bex mentioned, we've also, alongside this, by monitoring the feeders, we can look at non-target access. So from 172 hoppers monitored in 10 woods for 4 days, and over 81,000 photos and videos generated. Basically, we recorded the door being opened over 19,000 times by grey squirrels. and only 9 times by mice. So we know that as well as targeting the majority of squirrels in the woodland, we can make sure we don't target any non-target wildlife species. So looking at the efficacy of grey squirrel contraceptives and how that could potentially benefit tree health. So this is an output from our grey squirrel management model. This is just a sample based on a landscape of 8,000 grey squirrels and looking at applying different levels of contraceptive efficacy. So by contraceptive efficacy, we mean the percentage of squirrels we manage to feed a contraceptive to, together with the percentage of those squirrels that are actually affected by a contraceptive. So the lab trials will tell us what proportion of squirrels that we actually give a contraceptive to will actually be affected by it, but we also need to deliver the contraceptive to as many squirrels as possible. So far, our lab trials have suggested that around 80% of individuals could be achievable. Obviously, we're going to try and maximize that as much as possible. And our field trials have shown that you should be able to target at least 56% of the population of squirrels in your woods, but this can definitely be maximized by an initial removal of squirrels through other methods such as trapping and shooting. So you lower the density and lower the number of hoppers you have to put out for effective bait delivery. So as you can see from this graph, with different levels of contraceptive efficacy, if you have a 75% effective contraceptive, you get a very quick decline in the squirrel population in that wood. And then as you get to more isolated populations, as the effort required to deliver bait to those populations increases, and as squirrels are living out their lives, then you get a long tail at the end to eventual eradication. But you can feasibly reduce a squirrel population by 50% well within 8 years. And this means that within this time frame, you should be able to see a significant benefit to your tree health within your woodlands. So what we will basically what we've said is if you can reduce your squirrel density by half, but reduce it below your average UK density, then you should see a significant improvement in your tree health and a significant reduction in tree damage. So in addition to this, we've been looking at how we can improve the processes, reduce the amount of time taken to estimate squirrel densities in woodlands. So we've been looking into using AI to automatically tag squirrel photos. And basically during these research projects, we've probably processed around 255,000 grey squirrel photos. So this has involved people actually going through and digitally tagging every grey squirrel photo they see out of all of the different photos we got back from other different wildlife species, people, and all sorts, as you can imagine when you put out camera traps. So it's very time consuming and very labor intensive. So as part of the Rodtic Pathman project, we collaborated with Greenwich University to train the conservation AI mammal model for grey squirrels. So conservation AI is an AI model provider. They've trained it for a lot of UK mammal species now, and you can actually download an app to your desktop and remotely process any camera trap photos you have, and it will give you, it will tag them with the species it thinks it is, and gives you a percentage confidence as well in how confident it is that species. So to train the mammal model on grey squirrels, as it hadn't been trained on squirrels before, we sent them 20,000 photos from our project, similar to the photo that you can see there. And then we tested it. So we went through and manually validated the outputs from the model, and we found it was 89 to 90% accurate. So that's pretty good, and it's certainly accurate enough to generate useful and valuable estimates, squirrel density estimates from woodlands. So when we compared the two validations, so we compared manual identification of squirrels in 5 woodlands versus AI, and then generated a squirrel density estimate, we found that the two estimates were significantly correlated, so they're practically the same and within 1.2 squirrels per hectare each. So going forward, we are working with MammalWeb, who are a citizen science-based photo tagging app where you can upload your camera trap photos, and people can go through and tag them for you as to what species are in them. But they've combined with conservation AI, so you can upload your grey squirrel photos, your woodland photos, and then the AI will go through and process them and tag all the grey squirrels and automatically produce a density estimate for your woodland. And you can also go back through your photos, look at which ones it tagged as grey squirrels, just to double check that it is tagging the right ones. So going forward, we've just completed a large study on grey squirrel movement. So we've just tagged 19 grey squirrels with GPS colours in a wood. And then we were looking at areas of tree damage within that woodland and how grey squirrel movement is related to it. But then also we've applied different management methods like deploying our bait hoppers with the rhodamine dye, and looking at how the grey squirrel movement changes according to hopper deployment and how far away grey squirrels will move to access our contraceptive bait, our bait in the hoppers. So this will tell us the potential scale of impact of a contraceptive deployment in the future. So at the moment, we're just simulating contraceptive bait deployment, but this will give us some useful information specifically for our model as well on how we can attract squirrels into these bait hoppers. We've also started a new project collaborating with Forest Research to look at how grey squirrels bark strip. So what motivates them to bark strip, which squirrels are more likely to bark strip, and whether there's specific chemicals as well within bark that might actually deter them from bark stripping. So you could use it as a deterrent. And finally, we've just started a large project, the Red Squirrel Recovery Network. So this is a large collaborative project that's funded by the Lottery Heritage Fund. So the overall project is 5 years and costs £5 million. And we'll be working with wildlife trusts across the north of England and charities in southern Scotland. And we'll be training volunteer groups basically in our bait delivery methods. We'll be measuring bait uptake using our bait hoppers on a much larger scale. And we'll also be testing our ability of our hoppers to exclude non-target wildlife species. We'll also be developing our hoppers into more mass-producible, field-robust bait hoppers that could be manufactured in the future for contraceptive delivery. So that concludes my talk. So thank you all for listening.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Sarah. Some excellent work going on across the board. And I think it'd be really interesting having the Red Squirrel Recovery Network and the landscape scale trials and working with the volunteers. And I'm sure that'll go really well. I just want to take a moment to thank everybody that has supported and been involved in our grey squirrel work to date, and we'll obviously keep you updated as progress continues. But now I'll just move to the questions. So there's a question here from Roland that badgers are very strong and can climb. Has the risk of badgers pulling the feeders down and breaking into them been assessed? And if they succeed, they'll probably eat the lot.
So we have the woodlands that we're putting out our feeders in. Yeah, they I think pretty much all of them have had badgers. We've had badgers kind of sniffing at the hoppers. We've had photographs of them moving around the hoppers, but we've not actually had any of them even try to access the hoppers. So I don't know why that is. I think that's why the Red Squirrel Recovery Network will be important because we can test these methods on a much larger scale in lots of different woodlands. However, so far badgers have just not been interested. I don't know if it's because our bait is concealed inside the metal box. Certainly the stand helps. The stand is kind of just above. You have to make sure your stand is robust and they can't knock it over. But it still seems to deter them enough to keep them out of our hoppers. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. And just before anyone else asks, have you tested them on pine martins?
We have. I mean, obviously, pine marten. At the moment, they're not our main non-target to keep out, as they're not in the majority of areas where there's grey squirrels. However, I know their range is increasing, their numbers are increasing. We probably are going to use something a little bit more sophisticated to keep pine martens out, physical barriers and such. But what we found actually is when we put our basic hoppers out, the pine martens certainly ended up managing to get in, but it took them quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've mentioned, you only have to put our hoppers out for a couple of weeks before you've targeted most of the grey squirrels in the woodlands. So we're hoping that if you're only putting these devices out for short periods of time, that will really limit the number of non-targets that discover them and then, are able to access them in the end.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And another just one on the hopper. If using a specific grey squirrel feeding hopper, how can you ensure smaller young greys of a similar size to reds are also receiving the oral contraceptive?
So to be honest, they're not really our main target. We want to predominantly target our larger breeding grey squirrels. So the contraceptive is not going to have a permanent effect. We're trying to maximize its longevity as much as possible with all the work that Bex is doing. But essentially, to be most effective, we are going to immediately target those larger breeding females to reduce the population as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so the smaller ones will be the targets for kind of the next year.
Yeah, in the future. We'll get them eventually. So yes.
Thanks, Sarah. A question from Robin. In case the oral contraceptive does reach a non-target species, will a cure also be developed?
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
So obviously we're trying to get this to have the longest possible effect in squirrels, but as a vaccine, it's something that is going to wane over time. So at the moment, we're hoping that it would be 6 months to a year of effect, so that you would only have to apply it to squirrel populations once a year. So that does mean in the very, very small amount of cases where there might be something else that gets it, that effect is also going to wane as well. We're also looking at a really specific delivery schedule that is going to be tailored to the way that squirrels feed and the amount that they feed over a certain amount of time. And it's very unlikely that any other non-targets that would unlikely get into anything would feed at that same rate. So it's actually going to be limiting the effectiveness in any other species as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Bex. Maybe one for you, Giovanna. It's a question from Peter. Is it likely that additional research will be undertaken in Europe based upon, and he's put a link in the chat, but it is to an article about protecting mainland Europe for an invasion of grey squirrels because they're edging perilously close to crossing the Alps?
Very much so. At least 2 lines of research on 2 different species, besides the rats and mice that should be a worry for everybody in Europe. But there's grey squirrels are also in Italy, so the Italians are very interested in this. A number of other species of squirrels are in Central Europe, in Western Europe, so that's the other species. And also we are involved, in fact, also with Bex in research on coypu, which is another rodent. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Will this be accessible for all to buy and use, or only industry professionals, and will it be affordable?
So that's going to depend on the registration process that it goes through. The registration authorities will probably put the limits on kind of what they think is appropriate. So it could be that it's industry professionals like pest controllers or land agents, or it could be something that, which is what we're considering, is people would have to go through something like the Lantra course, which is already provided for grey squirrel management. So there could be a bolt on to that, which is use of contraceptives, which would give you certification. But obviously, this is something that we're going to be exploring during the registration process.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Bex. There's just a comment here about New Zealand's Department of Conservation carrying out widespread pest management, but to make it more effective, they monitor the tree seed output and avoid baiting in mast years. Just an interesting comment. I don't know whether, Sarah, you've been looking at masting years at all?
Yeah, I mean, specifically, Simon, our modeler, has just incorporated seed masting into the model. So the model is designed to help us decide the best contraceptive deployment strategy we could use, alongside other management methods as well, potentially. So incorporating the seed masting is quite important, because it really, if you have a seed mast year, it really boosts the squirrel population. I think that's what we've seen. We certainly saw last year as well, didn't we? We saw a big increase in grey squirrels because of the seed mast the year before. So it's something that we are obviously mindful of, but to be honest, we've tested our contraceptive delivery methods in seed mast years and non-seed mast years. And although we avoid autumn, as there's too much natural food available then, outside of autumn, we've shown that we can deliver it to most squirrels in most woodlands anyway, whether it's seed masting or not.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. There's a question around what is the target shelf life for the oral vaccine? If it comes in a larger container, will the vaccine survive for a season once the jar is opened, or is it likely to require a smaller individual dose?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at the moment with our test formula, we're doing 6 doses over 30 days. So we know that that vaccine itself is stable for that 30-day period. Obviously, that's quite a long period and a quite high number of doses. So throughout the next research period, we're going to try and narrow that down to a much shorter delivery period. So part of the stability testing is going to be part of the registration process as well. So we're going to need to prove that our vaccine formula is stable and usable for the entire delivery period. And then what's probably going to be likely is that you can buy a season's worth at a time. So if this is a once yearly product, you can buy it each year, and that would be the stability period.
Brilliant, thanks, Bex. There's a question about whether grey squirrel management is being arranged as part of the planting of new woodlands, or if it's being left to landowners. I think this came in when, Sarah, you were talking about things like the Western Forest and the new kind of woodland creation. And I know the Western Forest is still very much in its infancy, but I mean, it does incorporate areas like the West of England local nature recovery strategies, and a lot of those local nature recovery strategies that are being published do have a focus on grey squirrels. The West of England one specifically says to manage populations of the non-native grey squirrel to reduce their impact on woodland ecology, and potentially including the use of contraceptives to reduce breeding success. So I don't know whether you've had any more involvement in them, Sarah?
Not at the moment, no, but obviously we're kind of, poised, waiting for the plans to progress, and we certainly would like to be involved in that initiative.
Yeah, great, thank you. Could you share the link for the grey squirrel identification app, Sarah?
So it's not currently live, so it needs a few tweaks. I should have mentioned that. So we basically got it functional. It needs a few tweaks to make it a little bit more practical for people to upload the photos, but I'm hoping to get it live within the next 6 months, basically. I just need a little bit more funding, a little bit more development. And then when we have it live, then maybe we could put a link on the Squirrel Accord website so that people can actually access it, because that would be a good way to disseminate it.
Yeah, definitely have to share that, very much. And there's a question, we still seem to be very much in the testing and analysis phase of your contraceptive. Do we have a target year when contraception will be rolled out widely? Are we looking kind of like a year, 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, so at the moment we've got a general target of kind of rollout by the end of this decade. So we know we've got a couple of years still of precise development, which also hopefully should include some the big proof of concept in our colony and hopefully some field trials on top of that. And then the registration process to actually get this as a saleable product is approximately 2 to 5 years. So we're hoping we can achieve this all by 2030 to get it as a full rollout. But also as part of the testing process and alongside the registration process, we would hope to be able to do some larger scale field trials so we can actually start to kind of pre-roll this out in a kind of testing context to some larger scale areas and look at this kind of landscape scale testing under a research license so we can start to try and have an impact before we actually get this fully registered.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And there's a question, Katie. How often will it need to be checked? So, for example, the traps that are being used at the moment have to be checked daily, and you can only leave them a certain amount of hours. I know we've talked about reducing the kind of the labour intensity of management. So, is that something you're focusing on?
Yeah, so we're looking at the kind of number of doses and the time period over which those doses needed to be delivered. Obviously, as Sarah said, in the field, we know that over a 4-day delivery period, you're going to target the majority of squirrels in the woodland. So you just need to visit those hoppers kind of standard periods throughout those days to make sure that it's not run out. Obviously, if it is only a 4-day delivery period, you'd only need to visit during those 4 days or as long as it takes to top up that. With the traps, obviously, it's once every 24 hours for as long as your trapping period. So if we can even reduce that down by any point, it's going to be less labor intensive than the trapping. And as we said, it should, in theory, be once or twice a year that you're doing this very short delivery period, not continuous like the trapping would be. Katie did also ask about affordability.
Oh,
So that's something that we're definitely looking into. We know that it's just not going to be practical if it's really expensive. We're going to want to use this over wide areas. So it really needs to be affordable, and that's something we're building into kind of the testing phase to make sure that the actual construction of the vaccine isn't going to be exclusionary in terms of cost. So we know that it needs to be really small value per animal per dose, especially if you're looking like a whole woodland context. So yeah, it's something we're definitely bearing in mind.
yeah. So definitely more cost effective and less labor intensive.
Hopefully.
Excellent. I think we've come to the end of all the questions. Does anybody want to say anything? Any final kind of thoughts before we leave? Giovanna?
Yes, I'd like to add something that I think is important in this context. There's a lot of disquiet in Europe about endocrine disruptors because of hormones in the environment. The majority of contraceptives that we've been talking today are endocrine disruptors, as in they will disrupt the hormones. So there need to be also possibly a bigger conversation at UK and European level about the fact that the law about new drugs for animals did not consider that we might want to disrupt the fertility of animals. And so there should be the legislators or the people giving the registration, looking at the registration, should be perhaps more lenient because towards the people that ask for the registration, because this is exactly what we want. The affecting the fertility is the aim of a contraceptive, but probably the law was not created for this.
No, certainly not. And for the work that we're looking at is that it's in terms of problematic species and to reduce human wildlife conflicts and to deal with invasive species. So
correct. And we are in a strange position because whilst the vast majority of the world talks about conservation, and indeed we do talk about conservation of the red, but the vast majority do not consider overabundant species, what to do when a species becomes overabundant, as in the case of the grey.
Yeah, and invasive, yeah, definitely. Sarah, Bex, any final thoughts?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
just thank you to everyone for their support and obviously to the Squirrel Accord for continuing the
Yeah.
funding for this research.
Yeah, no, it's a very exciting time, and it's great to be part of something that's so forward thinking. So thanks very much to all of our excellent speakers and to you all for joining us. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, and we'll organise further webinars to share presentations from our conference that was earlier this year over the next few months. But thank you everyone again, and goodbye for now. Goodbye.
Thanks very much.
Bye.